June 4th, 1942. While the Battle of Midway was deciding the fate of the Pacific War, a Japanese pilot made one fatal mistake on a tiny Alaskan island. That mistake gave America the enemy's most advanced weapon, completely intact. And what U.S. engineers discovered inside this plane killed 10,000 Japanese pilots before the war even ended. This is the story of the Akutan Zero, the crashed fighter that doomed an empire. May 1942. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero was the most feared fighter plane in the world. It had terrorized Pearl Harbor, destroyed Allied air forces across Southeast Asia, shot down everything America threw at it. American pilots called it unbeatable. It could outturn, outclimb, and outrange every fighter the U.S. had. But nobody knew how. The Zero's design was a mystery. No Allied engineer had ever examined one up close. Every Zero shot down had either exploded on impact or sunk into the ocean. Until June 4th, 1942, when Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga made a decision that would change everything. June 3rd, 1942. While most people know about the Battle of Midway, almost nobody knows about the simultaneous Japanese attack on the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. This wasn't just a random raid. It was a carefully planned diversion. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's strategy: attack Dutch harbor in the Aleutians to draw American carriers north, away from Midway. Then hit Midway with overwhelming force and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet. On June 3, 1942, Japanese carriers Ryujo and Junyo launched airstrikes against Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Among the attack force, 12 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters from the carrier Ryujo. Flight leader, Lieutenant Tadashi Kaneko. Wingman, Petty Officer. First Class Tadayoshi Koga, 19 years old. One of the youngest Zero pilots in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Koga was flying Zero Tail number 5173, a brand new A6M Model 21, factory fresh, every system pristine, the latest modifications, the perfect specimen. The strike on Dutch Harbor went smoothly. American defenses were caught off guard. The Japanese bombers hit fuel storage tanks and military installations, while the Zeros provided cover. But as the Japanese formation turned back toward their carriers, American anti-aircraft gunners got lucky. One round hit Koga's Zero, not a direct hit, just a single bullet that severed his oil return line. Koga didn't know it yet, but his engine was slowly dying. Oil was leaking into the engine cowling. Engine temperature was rising. Within minutes, his engine would seize completely. Lieutenant Kaneko, the flight leader, noticed Koga was falling behind. His Zero was trailing thin white smoke. Over the radio, Kaneko ordered Koga to make an emergency landing on Akutan Island, about 25 miles east of Dutch Harbor. Akutan Island. Population: 47 Aleut natives. No American military presence, no strategic value. Kaneko told Koga, "Land on Akutan. We'll send a submarine to pick you up within 48 hours." This was standard procedure. The Japanese Navy had recovered dozens of pilots this way. Land on an isolated island, wait for submarine extraction, return to duty. Koga acknowledged the order and turned toward Akutan. From 1,500 feet, Koga spotted what looked like a perfect emergency landing site. A large, flat, grassy meadow near the north end of the island. He lined up his approach, gear up for a belly landing, flaps down, speed bleeding off. Everything by the book. But what Koga couldn't see from the air was that the meadow was actually a muskeg bog, a thick layer of moss and grass covering deep, soft mud. The kind of terrain that looks solid from above but collapses under any weight. June 4th, 1942. 1:42 p.m. local time. Koga's Zero touched down on what he thought was solid ground. For exactly 2 seconds, everything seemed fine. Then the landing gear punched through the moss layer and hit the mud beneath. The Zero's nose dug in, hard, The tail flipped up and over. The entire aircraft inverted in less than 1 second. The canopy, which Koga had left open for quick escape, slammed into the mud. The impact drove Koga's head into the instrument panel with massive force. His neck snapped instantly. The Zero came to rest completely upside down, tail pointing at the sky, nose buried in the bog. Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga, 19 years old, was dead. But his Zero was almost completely intact. The wings, undamaged. The fuselage, straight and true. The engine, one dead cylinder from the oil leak but otherwise functional. The instruments, all present. The guns, fully loaded. The radios, operational. Even the top-secret tactical maps were still in the cockpit. The most advanced fighter plane in the Pacific Theater was sitting in an Alaskan bog, almost flight-ready, and the Japanese had no idea. Lieutenant Kaneko circled overhead and saw Koga's Zero upside down in the bog. He couldn't see Koga moving. Standard Japanese doctrine was clear. If a pilot dies on enemy territory and the plane can't be recovered, destroy it. Kaneko made 3 strafing runs, firing his 20mm cannons and 7.7mm machine guns at Koga's downed Zero, but he was shooting at the underside of the aircraft. The Zero's belly was reinforced to protect against ground fire. The rounds bounced off or punched through without hitting anything critical. The fuel tanks didn't ignite because they were nearly empty after the long mission. After the 3rd pass, Kaneko's own fuel was running critically low. He had to return to the carrier. He reported Koga as killed in action and the Zero as destroyed. Mission closed. Except the Zero wasn't destroyed. It was sitting in that bog, waiting. For 5 weeks, Koga's Zero sat in that bog. The Aleut natives on Akutan knew it was there. They stayed away. They had no radios to report it and no reason to approach a crashed enemy plane. July 10, 1942. A U.S. Navy PBY Catalina patrol plane was conducting a routine search of the Aleutian Islands for Japanese survivors and equipment. The crew spotted something unusual on Akutan Island. A large shape in a meadow that didn't match the terrain. They flew lower. It was an intact Zero. Upside down but clearly salvageable. The pilot immediately radioed Dutch Harbor. "We have an intact enemy fighter on Akutan Island." Repeat, intact enemy fighter. This message went straight up the chain of command. Within hours, it reached Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet. Nimitz's response was immediate. Recover that aircraft. Use any resources necessary. This is top priority. A salvage team was assembled at Dutch Harbor under Lieutenant William Thies, an engineering officer who had experience with aircraft recovery. July 12, 1942. The team landed on Akutan with a small barge, winches, cables, and tools. They found Koga's body still in the cockpit. He was buried with full military honors on the island. Then they went to work on the Zero. The Zero weighed approximately 5,300 pounds. It was embedded in soft mud. The recovery crew had to work carefully to avoid damaging the airframe. First, they dug drainage trenches around the plane to reduce the suction from the bog. Then they attached cables to the landing gear and tail structure. Using a portable winch powered by a gasoline generator, they slowly, carefully pulled the Zero out of the mud. It took 6 hours. When they finally flipped it upright, the damage assessment was almost unbelievable. The propeller, bent from the impact but replaceable. The wings, no structural damage. The landing gear, one strut slightly bent. The engine, cylinders full of mud but mechanically sound. Bullet holes, approximately 30 holes in non-critical areas from Kaneko's strafing runs. Everything else intact. They disassembled the wings, drained the fluids, and loaded everything onto the barge. July 15, 1942. The Zero was shipped to Dutch Harbor, then to Seattle on a transport ship under armed guard and maximum secrecy. From Seattle, it went by train to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, California. Top secret clearance required for anyone who came within 100 yards. The project codename, Job 1. August 1942, North Island Naval Air Station, San Diego. A team of naval engineers, intelligence officers, and test pilots gathered around the Akutan Zero. They had one mission: figure out how to beat it. The lead test pilot was Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, an experienced fighter pilot with over 2,000 flight hours. When Sanders first saw the Zero up close, he later recalled, "It looked like a toy. The skin was so thin I could dent it with my thumb. The whole thing seemed impossibly fragile." What they were about to discover would change the entire Pacific War. The engineering team stripped the Zero down to its frame. What they found shocked them: the airframe. The Zero's skin was made of an aluminum alloy called extra superduralumin, or ESD. It was approximately 0.04 inches thick in most places. For comparison, the American F-4F Wildcat used aluminum skin 0.065 inches thick, nearly 60% thicker. You could literally punch through a Zero's wing with your fist. The fuel system. The Zero carried 518 liters of fuel in two main tanks, one in front of the cockpit, one behind the pilot's seat. Neither tank had self-sealing capability. Self-sealing fuel tanks were standard on American, British, and German fighters by 1940. They used a rubber lining that swelled when punctured by bullets, automatically sealing small holes. The Zero had nothing, just bare aluminum. One tracer round into a fuel tank meant instant fire. Pilot protection. No armor plating behind the pilot's seat, no armored glass windscreen, no armor protecting the engine. Total pilot armor, 0 pounds. American fighters like the F-4F Wildcat had over 200 pounds of armor protecting the pilot and critical systems. The engine. The Zero used a Nakajima Sakai 12 radial engine, 14 cylinders, 940 horsepower. Excellent power-to-weight ratio, but completely exposed. No armored cowling. Why was it built this way? Weight savings. The Zero weighed 5,313 pounds fully loaded. The F-4F Wildcat weighed 7,952 pounds. By eliminating armor, using thin skin, and skipping protected fuel tanks, the Zero saved approximately 1,500 pounds. That weight savings translated directly into performance maximum speed, 331 miles per hour at 16,000 feet. Rate of climb, 3,100 feet per minute. Combat radius, 1,200 miles. Maneuverability, could complete a 360-degree turn in approximately 16 seconds at 200 miles per hour. The Zero could outturn anything in the sky. September 20th, 1942. After 6 weeks of repairs and restoration, the Akutan Zero was ready to fly. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders climbed into the cockpit. The restoration team had replaced the damaged propeller, cleaned the engine, patched the bullet holes, and topped off the fuel tanks. They painted the Zero in U.S. Navy colors with large American stars to prevent friendly fire. Sanders ran through the pre-flight checklist. Engine start, smooth. The Sakai 12 engine fired up immediately. Taxi, light and responsive. Takeoff roll, incredibly short. The Zero lifted off after just 300 feet. Sanders' first impression recorded in his debrief: "It flies like it weighs nothing. The climb rate is phenomenal. It's like riding a rocket." For the next 3 hours, Sanders put the Zero through every maneuver in the book. Maximum speed runs. Climbing tests. Turning tests at various speeds and altitudes. Stall characteristics. Dive tests. Mock dogfights against an F-4F Wildcat flown by Lieutenant Robert Childers. The results were recorded on gun camera footage and detailed technical reports. The Zero's advantages. At speeds below 250 miles per hour, the Zero could outturn any American fighter, period. Below 10,000 feet, it could outclimb everything except the P-38 Lightning. Its range was triple that of the F-4F Wildcat. The Zero's fatal weaknesses. Above 300 miles per hour, the controls became extremely heavy. Turning was difficult. The ailerons, wing flaps for rolling, were almost immovable above 250 miles per hour. The Zero had no effective way to escape a diving attack. Rolling to evade was nearly impossible at high speed. The airframe couldn't handle high G negative dives. The wings would start bending. And most critically, the plane had zero protection against gunfire. Sanders reported, "One good burst from .50 caliber machine guns will disintegrate this aircraft. The fuel tanks are unprotected. One tracer round, and the pilot is sitting in a fireball." The test results went straight to Admiral Nimitz and the Navy's Fighter Director Training School. Within weeks, every U.S. Navy and Marine Corps fighter squadron in the Pacific received a classified bulletin titled Mitsubishi A6M Zero, Tactical Vulnerabilities and Recommended Engagement Doctrine. The new tactics were revolutionary. 1. Never dogfight a Zero below 250 miles per hour. If a Zero got on your tail in a slow-speed turning fight, you were dead. Period. 2. Use boom and zoom tactics. Dive from altitude, make one high-speed firing pass, then zoom back up using your superior engine power. The Zero couldn't follow you in a high-speed climb and couldn't roll effectively to evade. 3. Target the fuel tanks. Aim for the fuselage, especially the area in front of and behind the cockpit. One good burst would ignite the unprotected fuel. 4. Use altitude advantage. American fighters like the F-4F and later the F-6F, Hellcat and F-4U Corsair could dive faster and climb better at high speeds. Always start fights from above the Zero. 5. Never try to outturn it. This was drilled into every pilot. The Zero turns inside you. Accept it. Don't try to turn with it. Use your speed and power. These tactics were taught at every training base. Gun camera footage from the Akutan Zero tests was shown to every fighter pilot. The results were immediate. Before the Akutan Zero capture, U.S. fighter pilots had a loss ratio of approximately 3-to-1 against Zeros. For every Zero shot down, America lost 3 fighters. After the new tactics were implemented in late 1942, that ratio reversed. By mid-1943, American pilots were shooting down Zeros at a ratio of 5-to-1 or better. The captured Zero also influenced aircraft design. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, which entered service in early 1943, was specifically designed to counter the Zero using knowledge from the Akutan tests. Massive 2,000 horsepower engine for superior speed and climb rate. Heavy armor, over 200 pounds protecting the pilot and engine. Self-sealing fuel tanks as standard. 6.50 caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per gun. The Hellcat was 2,000 pounds heavier than the Zero, but it didn't matter. It was faster, tougher, and optimized for boom and zoom attacks. The final kill ratio for Hellcats versus Zeros, 19-to-1. The Vought F-4. U Corsair, entering service in late 1943, was even more dominant. Its 2,250 horsepower engine gave it a top speed of 417 miles per hour, 86 miles per hour faster than a Zero. Kill ratio, 11-to-1. The question everyone asks, why did Japan build such a vulnerable fighter? The answer reveals a fundamental difference in military philosophy. Japanese naval aviation doctrine in 1940 was based on 3 principles. 1. Range is survival. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles of ocean. Fighters needed extreme range to escort bombers and protect carriers. The Zero's 1,200-mile combat radius was achieved by eliminating every unnecessary pound of weight. 2. Agility prevents hits. Japanese doctrine assumed that skilled pilots in highly maneuverable aircraft would simply avoid being hit. Why add armor to protect against bullets if your plane is too agile to be hit in the first place? 3. Offensive power over defensive protection. Every pound spent on armor was a pound not spent on fuel, ammunition, or maneuverability. Japan believed it was better to have a plane that could reach the enemy and destroy them than a plane that could survive damage but lacked range or agility. This philosophy worked brilliantly from December 1941 through mid-1942. When the Zero's opponents were obsolete fighters like the Brewster Buffalo or early model P-40 Warhawks, the Zero's advantages dominated. But as soon as American tactics evolved and newer fighters appeared, the Zero's weaknesses became fatal. By 1944, the Zero was a death trap. Japanese pilots called their unprotected fuel tanks flying Zippo lighters. One American pilot described shooting down a Zero. "I put maybe 20 rounds into him. The whole plane just exploded. There was nothing left but pieces." The Akutan Zero itself had a short but important career. After initial test flights in September 1942, it was used extensively for training and evaluation through early 1943. February 1943. During a test flight, the restored engine finally gave out. The pilot made a successful emergency landing at North Island, but the Zero's flying career was over. The Navy briefly considered restoring it again, but newer examples of captured Zeros were becoming available from various Pacific battlefields. The Akutan Zero was retired and placed in storage. In February 1945, during a routine inspection, a mechanic accidentally started a fire while draining old fuel. The Akutan Zero burned completely. By that point, it didn't matter. Its secrets had already changed the war, but its legacy lived on. American tactics developed from studying the Akutan Zero remained standard doctrine through Korea, Vietnam, and into modern air combat training. The principles still taught today: don't fight the enemy's strengths. Exploit their weaknesses. Between 1942 and 1945, approximately 10,000 Japanese pilots died flying Zeros. Many of those deaths were directly attributable to the Zero's lack of protection, and pilots who could have survived hits to their aircraft instead burned to death when unprotected fuel tanks ignited. Japanese engineers knew this was happening. By 1943, they had developed self-sealing fuel tank technology. But implementing it would have required retooling factories, reducing production rates, and accepting reduced range. Japan's military leadership chose not to make the change. Production continued. Pilots continued dying. By late 1944, Japan was running out of trained pilots. They began the kamikaze program, turning Zeros into guided missiles because they were losing too many pilots to U.S. fighters. The very aircraft that had dominated the Pacific in 1942 became a coffin by 1944. And it all traces back to one 19-year-old pilot who thought he was landing on solid ground. Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga never knew what his crash would mean. He followed his training, made a textbook emergency landing, and died instantly in a freak accident in a remote Alaskan bog. But that crash gave America the single most valuable intelligence asset of the Pacific War. The Akutan Zero revealed that Japan's most fearsome weapon had a fatal flaw built into its very design. And once that flaw was exposed, the myth of Japanese invincibility shattered. By 1943, American pilots no longer feared the Zero. They hunted it. The aircraft that had terrorized the Pacific became obsolete, not because of new technology, but because one crashed plane revealed the truth. The Zero was designed to dominate, but not to survive. In war, sometimes the most important victories don't happen in battle. Sometimes they happen in a bog on a forgotten island, where one plane, one crash, and one young pilot's death changed everything. Tadayoshi Koga is buried on Akutan Island. His grave was maintained by the U.S. Navy throughout the war and remains there today. Every year, pilots from both the U.S. Navy and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force visit the site. They leave flowers, and they remember the crash that changed the war.